Hello, everyone, and welcome to Elevate Your Interview, Girls for Business's February event. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and we're so excited to have you here. So just to introduce our wonderful panelists, thank you for joining us today. We have Ms. Jiya, Sheth and Ms. Kiran Wattamwar. Now I will pass it over to Sophie, the co-outreach director and co-host of today's event.
Hi guys, my name is Sophie Lee, and like Rachel said, I'm a co-director of outreach at GFB, and I'll be co-hosting today's event, and I'll go ahead and pass it on to Anna, my other co-host.
Hi everyone, my name is Anna, and I'm an outreach coordinator at GFB. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and we're so excited to see everyone. I hope you've all been having an amazing weekend.
And just so we know who's here, and to warm up for today's event, if you guys could please type your name, grade, and where you're from in the chat, that'd be awesome, and we can get to know each other a little bit. So I am a senior in high school from Georgia, and give you guys a few seconds. And right now I'm in Eastern Standard Time, so I know it's a little bit late, but whatever time it is for you, thank you for taking the time to join us today. Looks like we have a lot of participants from Maryland. We have someone from Illinois. Okay, awesome. And then I'll go ahead and pass it back to Anna.
Okay, so today at the Elevate Your Interview event, we hope to educate, inspire, and empower all middle and high school girls in pursuing a business career. We have two highly qualified panelists today who will be hosting an engaging and interactive workshop on how to ace your interviews. Our panelists have a variety of experiences ranging from business to computer science and law, which allow us to see different perspectives on interviewing processes. With your interest in business, interviewing will be a crucial step in getting internships, jobs, and other opportunities in the future. And we hope you gain lots of insight on how to better prepare for interviews.
Awesome. And then moving on to the next slide, we'll have a full rundown of today's event structure. So first, I'll be briefly introducing our organization, Girls for Business, and sharing our initiatives with you all. And our panelists will then be introducing themselves, sharing their business experiences, and speaking on general interviewing tips. And then from then on, you'll get to participate in a 15-minute practice interview session with the panelists or stay in the main room for a Q&A session. And after, we'll rejoin to take a group photo, ask a few questions, and end with some closing remarks. So now to talk a little bit about Girls for Business. Girls for Business is a student-led nonprofit organization that is dedicated to empowering middle and high school girls interested in exploring business career pathways. Established in June 2020 and run by a team of over 100 members, Girls for Business has impacted thousands of girls worldwide through its platforms. By providing free mentorship programs, business news, educational virtual events, and engaging resources, our team hopes to create a platform where girls can find business guidance and establish strong connections with like-minded young women. So GFB runs 3 educational programs. Moving on to the next slide. GFB has 3 educational programs: our business mentorship program, our business resource program, and our business networking program. The business mentorship program has provided free business mentorship to over 170 student mentees, with our 3rd cycle ongoing. And our resource program has released over 45 biweekly business newsletters with educational resources and business news. And lastly, our community platforms have connected over 4,000 girls from 60 countries across the globe.
We'll now pass it on to our panelists to introduce themselves. Kiran, if you would get us started.
Yeah, that sounds great. Hi, everyone. My name is Kiran. I am currently a first-year law student at Stanford, but before that, worked in computer science and in architecture and design. Kind of learned a lot about interviewing in a lot of different fields and the norms that are different, but also the things that are kind of in common there. And fun fact, I actually do interview for MIT's undergraduate interview process. And so have learned a little bit about what it looks like from behind the scenes, not only in kind of an industry experience, but also in education. So can definitely answer some questions around that.
Thank you so much. Next, I'll pass it on to Jiya.
Yeah, absolutely. So, hey everyone, my name is Jiya. I'm a freshman at Michigan Raw School of Business. Um, Clearly, like I don't have the same experiences that Kiran does, but from my level, I have a lot of recruitment for consulting and finance groups on campus because just the club culture at Michigan Ross is application based. So you have an interview process, 3 or 4 rounds maybe. And so I've gone through that process and also helped recruit, next semester freshmen or sophomores in that process. So I can speak on that end. And just aside from that, a lot of my high school was kind of going into the medical track, and I just switched kind of end moment. So I know that interviewing plays a key role in how you convey your story and how you bring forth and show your experiences. So I'd love to get to know you all and talk on that behalf.
Thank you, Gia. Our panelists will now be sharing a few general tips and advice on interviewing before we separate into our breakout session. Please pay attention as some of these techniques can be put into use when we break out for small group practice. I'll pass it on to Kiran to get us started.
Thanks. So I think a lot of the tips that I've put together will hopefully feel like they're common sense, but it's because they really are. I think there's a lot of really core things about interviews that are fundamentally just about you trying to get to know someone and them trying to get to know you better. That's really the core purpose, although I think different interviews might be trying to get at different parts of that. So for example, if I do a technical interview in computer science for a job, they might be trying to see like how technically oriented I am, like how much experience I have or how I think when they give me a problem. But sometimes an interview is to try to gauge how you work in a team. Like, would you actually be a good fit for an environment? Would you get along with the people there? And do you kind of have a similar work style? And sometimes an interview is really just trying to get to know who you are as a person. So what's your story and your narrative, as Jiya was talking about, and what inspires you and what makes you an actual human, kind of beyond the pieces of paper you might submit in your application. So really just, I think the core here is try to figure out what the purpose of the interview you're having is. Usually you kind of want to be ready to answer a lot of these questions, but different interviews really are for different things. So if you can figure out what it's for, you're kind of already getting a head start in prepping. And the next one. This is another kind of thing that I know I personally experienced a lot, especially in my interviews when I was starting out internships in college. But I think some interviews will ask questions that you just don't have a great answer for. Maybe you just never thought about it. Sometimes interviews will ask you, like, what are your interests? And maybe that's a question you would have anticipated, but sometimes they might ask for your opinion about something. And I think the natural feeling that you might have sometimes, depending on how you respond to these situations, is to just freeze up. You might want to be really silent and have some time and space to think about your answer. But a lot of interviewers actually genuinely much prefer for you to talk through your thought process. So even if you don't have a polished answer quite yet, it's totally okay to let your interviewer know that you just need a few moments to think through something and ask, is it okay if I just take a second to think about this? And as you're thinking, share why you're kind of walking through the step of thoughts that you are to get to your final answer. It's okay if you don't always have a great answer out of the gate, but also showing your interviewer how you're thinking gives them a lot more information to go off of and helps them also understand who you are a lot better. And the last one, I think it's so important to remember that interviews are not just for the company or organization or the role that you are interviewing for. It's really also for you. And so it's so important to bring questions. Interviews aren't only meant to go one way, and it's pretty standard practice, depending on where you are, for an interviewer to leave the last few minutes for you to ask questions too. And I think this time is so important because it might be some of your only space to get answers about things that you're curious for. And so if there are things you want to know about the culture of that place, for example, I often would ask in my computer science internships about how many women were on the team I was interviewing for and how they kind of approached diversity and issues in that space. And so if there are things you're curious about, this is your chance to kind of ask and also get something out of it too. Yeah, that's it for my quick tips. That I'll pass it off to Jiya.
Yeah, so echoing basically everything she said and kind of going into more specific questions that you might start off in an interview with. The first being, tell me about yourself. And I know there's so many jokes about this, like, did they not read your resume? Like, do they not know who you are? But genuinely, this is just kind of this question is just to allow the interviewer to ease into your portion of the interview. You know, they may have conducted previous ones already, and they just want to get a hint of your personality as well as a refresher of your application. And so this is probably one of the core questions that I'd say are useful to structure in your brain a little bit so that you can give this solid, 60 to 90-second overview of who you are as a person, professionally speaking. And so, dividing your response in kind of three categories, the bulk of it being in your experiences part, the past part, where you're highlighting any applicable skills that you may have, front loading with like a theme that you can connect to this position. Like maybe you're someone interested in healthcare like I had been and now want to go into business. A big theme that I presented was, research. I did so much research in the healthcare industry, and just conveying that I have the skill sets to pursue that same type of research, even when it goes into roles of consulting or finance, kind of summarizing using a theme that allows the interviewer to get the general idea that you're hoping to portray to them. And then giving short summaries of what your present goals are and how you plan on continuing them in whatever role that you pursue with the company or with a different organization that you're there to interview for. And so going on to like the next part of it, where they ask, towards the end, do you have any questions for us? I know this part is quite intimidating. We might like Google search questions like, oh, basic questions that you want to ask an interviewer. But as Kiran said, this is really just a time for you to get to know whether this is the place that you want to actually spend time at. Because at the end of the day, like, just say you're going to get a lot of offers from different places. What is that thing that's going to define that you want to go to that one place? And so finding those factors that define whether you want to pursue your job position at like, XYZ company or XYZ organization, you'd want to ask those core questions that really impact whether or not you're going to choose that place. So having like a genuine motive behind the questions you're asking and not just asking, a Googleable question, I guess. You want to make sure that you're showing some form of research about the company, as well as you want to show that you have a sense of what you want out of your experiences and aligning that with your goals. So that just, that again shows confidence to whoever you're interviewing for or with, and allows the interviewer to understand your stream of thoughts and how you intend to take this opportunity to the next level. And so kind of concluding on this last note where we have networking, in the business arena especially, I've come across this real stressful notion around networking. Like, what even is it? What do you like? Are we just building, superficial conversations and laughing at things that are not funny just so that they know us? It's really not. At the end of the day, you want to build genuine connections, because those are the connections that you can really bring forth in the business and workforce if you do have to interact with, an individual in the future. But also in general, you want to help increase your visibility, being able to communicate effectively, build like just genuine friendships, genuine relationships with people on a more professional note, but still, having a personable touch to it. You build these connections that maybe expose you to different opportunities, as well as give you a sense of self-confidence in what you're saying and how you are going to, if you're interviewing for a company and you just genuinely don't know anyone there, it can be a little bit more intimidating. You may feel that, you have to push a little further to get your name out there. And so having those connections is just a way to ease yourself into it. Well, obviously just like having people to go back on and lean on during this, whatever application process that you're going through. And so that kind of wraps up whatever quick tips and tricks I have from my end.
All right, thank you guys both so much for sharing those tips and information. I know it'll be super helpful for us as we move into our next section, where we'll be able to split into breakout rooms. So for all of our attendees, if you do feel comfortable, in a little bit, you'll get the option to join a breakout room with Jiya. And there you can spend some time practicing interview questions and also receiving live feedback from her on how to improve. And then if you're not comfortable with live practicing right now, you can stay in the main room here, where Kiran will be answering any questions that you may have or speaking more about certain topics that she brought up before. So if we can go ahead and open the breakout rooms, you guys should be seeing a pop-up soon. And then if you would like to join the practice breakout room session, you can join there. And then if not, we'll stay here. So I'll give you guys a few seconds to transition. All right, so you guys should be seeing a breakout room pop up, and Jiya, you can go ahead and join the breakout room.
Yeah, I am not seeing a breakout room pop up.
Okay, gotcha. All right, sorry, give us 1 second.
I think the way that the breakouts are set up, it should be open invite. But I think if it might be easier if you're interested in joining the breakout, if you could either raise your hand or private message me or Sophie, and then I can move you into one of those rooms.
Okay, awesome. If anyone else would also like to join, like Rachel said, you can either raise your hand or just DM one of us, and we'll transition you to that breakout room. So take a few more seconds just in case someone would still like to join, and then if not, we'll continue with some Q&A questions. All right. Okay, so for all of our attendees who are still in the main room, just keep in mind that Kiran is here and she has a lot of experience and advice to give you guys. So if you have any questions at all, please feel free to type it in the chat or DM Anna or I, or even unmute if you'd like, and definitely ask those questions. So we'll go ahead and get started with a few of our RSVP questions to get us started. So Kiran, what do you think is the best thing you can do to stand out from competitors in the employment process?
Yeah, I think there's maybe two answers that come to mind for me. One of them, which I know doesn't sound very intuitive, is I think it's really important to admit when you don't know something. I think it takes a lot of humility to recognize that maybe a question that was asked of you is something you actually just genuinely don't know about. And again, this kind of goes back to creating space and time for you to be thoughtful about your answers. If you kind of have these canned generic answers, like for example, if you are searching on Google for tips in advance and you see kind of templates for how to answer something, the odds are that if anyone else is also searching, they're going to answer the same way. And if you don't know the answer to something and you make it up, I think you can kind of be memorable in a bad way. But it is so important to kind of recognize what your own bounds are and when you do have an answer to something or when you don't. It's perfectly fine to admit when you don't know something. And obviously, like, that's not going to be relevant to a question if somebody asks you like what your interests are. Like, but if this is kind of an interview about like what you know, it is so important to do that. The other thing that I would say, though, is to be specific. Again, this kind of goes back to when your answers start sounding kind of generic. I think what makes you special is that you have your own personal interests and you're your own person with your own experiences. Again, I know this sounds really cheesy, but the more you can kind of leverage your own personal insights and the things that you kind of care about and you're passionate about, it'll really unlock something more engaging in your interview. Whereas I think if you're just trying to answer to what you think they want to hear, again, if other people are doing the same thing, your answer might just feel the same or feel not so genuine. And so the more genuine you can be and the more specific you can be about your answers, the better it'll be for you. So if somebody asks you a question about why you're interested in this specific role, if you can kind of dig into more about what that company does or look at things that people have done while they were there or people who you really admire, the more you can kind of pull on those specific threads, the more you both can show how much you care, but also why you care, which I think is much more compelling to hear about.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Rachel actually asked, how do you tailor your presentation style for interviews in distinct fields?
Yeah, that's a great question. Definitely have a lot of really varied experiences across all of this. I know that when I have interviewed in things in like a design role, I think people are much more laid back, are much more kind of candid, and are kind of kinder. I think the environment is a lot more warm, and so it's much easier to be yourself in those cases. But I've also interviewed for government jobs, and it's very stiff, very kind of formal feeling, and the people you're talking to are kind of a bit older, and so the vibe is just really different. And in engineering, I think there's obviously a lot of stereotypes about like engineering culture, but there's kind of the acknowledgement of kind of the presence of women, as I had mentioned. I do remember in one of my interviews, it was kind of a bunch of people were invited to interview in the same day, and we all were pulled to different rooms, but it was me and 20 men. So I just remember like those dynamics very clearly. But yeah, I think those atmospheres are something to kind of acknowledge, but also like the kinds of questions and the kinds of thinking that people are asking you to do really vary. And so maybe I think the kind of takeaway here is the really core things that I've learned in all of those times were just to really be as sincere as possible. And to also, again, like admit when I don't know something, because it's totally natural and not to. And it kind of makes the interview more interesting because you kind of see how people think afterwards.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that answer, because I know it'll be very useful as some of us are still trying to figure out what fields we want to go to. And just seeing how that can affect the interview process is really helpful. And kind of tying on to what you said about being genuine, Claire did ask in the chat, how do you prevent your answers from sounding over-rehearsed or robotic?
Yeah, I think this is going to be really personal to your preferences, but different people have different ways of kind of preparing for an interview. And I think if you are the kind of person who feels like you're going to freeze up and you kind of practice in advance to get over that, this might be something that feels like a kind of risk in that case. But I definitely recommend when you're practicing for an interview, like if you can try and find somebody that you can talk to. So it could be at home with your parents, or you can kind of ask a friend. But if you can have just a normal conversation to go through some questions you think someone might ask you, I think that's the best, because when you're preparing an answer, I think instead of feeling like you're trying to be tied down to a script, what you really want to do is figure out the core points you want to express and the kind of words that you want to use to get there. So for me, like when I don't have a great answer for something, it usually means that I like either don't feel like I care enough about something, which is a good thing to know about yourself. Like if it's just something you don't actually really want to do for an interview, or it might just be that you haven't thought about it enough. And talking through something with a friend, I think helps you not be really formal and rehearsed at the same time, but helps you practice what kinds of words are important to get your message across, so that when you're actually in your interview, you're not scrambling to find the right ways to express something. And this is kind of like, you know, if you kind of have a joke that you like to repeat in like different friend groups or something, like if the first time it doesn't go over well, you'll kind of practice, but you never want it to sound mechanical or canned. But if you're in an environment that's kind of more, I don't know, just more laid back and more informal, you can practice the important part, which is just like figuring out how to talk about something without feeling like it's tied to a script. I think that's when it becomes a trap.
Yeah, thank you so much. Kind of related, how would you answer 3 words to describe yourself?
Oh man, I like really dislike these kinds of interview questions. They like make me so anxious. Mostly because I think like it's not necessarily a great way to get to know someone. Tactically, like if I was just thinking of a strategy of how to answer these questions, I think I don't know that there's really an ideal answer, but hopefully you can use these sorts of light questions to show your personality a little more, instead of showing that you're like hardworking and like you are a perfectionist, or, you know, things that I think are not really going to advance somebody's understanding of who you are. So the more they can have personality, I think the better. If you have like a sense of humor you want to use in this case, like this sort of question is where you can do that. But I kind of group this in the same family of questions of like, if you were a vegetable, which one would you be? Like, it's not really supposed to help understand how credible you are, but maybe just kind of get you to be a little more comfortable as an icebreaker. So don't stress out too much about these sorts of questions.
Gotcha. And following up on that, because you said that you didn't like these types of questions as much, what questions do you usually gear towards more, I guess? And like, why would you say that you prefer those questions more?
Yeah, I think so I see this a lot when I'm doing kind of undergraduate interviews, but one thing that I usually always end my interview with or begin it with is just asking something that the person I'm interviewing has gotten really excited or nerdy about recently. And the reason that I really love this sort of question is that it's very open-ended, so you can kind of take it wherever you want. And you can really be comfortable in your answer because you will only ever want to talk about something you genuinely are excited about. The point of this question isn't for you to show how knowledgeable you are, but just to show that like you are also a human who gets really excited about things. And I think that sort of excitement is it's like really exciting to see as an interviewer too. But yeah, I really love those sorts of questions because I think they let you kind of go down some sort of surprise path. I think the interviews are way more fun because of it. And usually you find ways to tie in threads in the future in the rest of that interview to kind of go back to that first answer. But it creates a frame for the rest of it.
Yeah, and also this next question, I'm like genuinely curious about it too. What do interviewers want to know most from the interviewee?
Yeah, I think this really, really depends on what kind of interview this is. So if it's a getting to know you interview, I think just really practically, it's kind of making sure that you knew that you applied to this thing and you know what it actually is, that you didn't lie about what you wrote, like, you know, in your application, that you can speak to your experiences that you've written out about. And also that you actually are genuinely interested in doing this work to justify their resources and their time in investing in you. And so I think really, if you can answer those three questions, just like who you are, like why you applied and why this internship and like what you can bring to that, I think that is really the most important. And ideally you do it in a way that makes you kind of more special or makes you memorable because you were specific and genuine and really talking about things you kind of know about. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And I was curious because obviously you have experience in multiple disciplines, but I did want to ask you a little bit more about your journey and kind of how you got to where you are today with an interest in law, but also your interest in the path. Kind of how did you sort through figuring out what you wanted to do?
Yeah. So when I actually was in elementary school, I remember deciding that my life dream was to be a Pixar animator. And that actually lasted until I got into college. And so I studied architecture and computer science to get at that kind of animation aspect of everything, kind of doing it from an engineering and artistic perspective. And I did graduate with both of those focus areas, but kind of midway through college, I got really interested in the ethics of technology as I was learning to build all of these things, but didn't have a good way of thinking about how it might affect the world. And that wasn't really part of our education. And so kind of hard pivoted, took my first law class and got really, really interested in it. And then in grad school, I kind of went after these questions in a 2-year course of a really broad kind of master's program. And so was able to explore a lot of different topics with this sort of question in my head of how to ethically create technology. And was interning and worked at Palantir. It's this tech company that builds analytics tools for the government. And as you can imagine, when governments have really powerful tools and a lot of data, it's also possible that they can misuse that data and possibly harm people. And so my job was to think about the civil liberties and human rights concerns when that work came up. And so that's what I was doing for 3 years. And now that I'm at law school, I think I'm trying to figure out how to speak a lot of different languages at the same time. So how do you speak to engineers and how do you speak to designers? How do you speak to consumers? And how do you speak in the language of the law to make sure that you can create systemic change? Because I think so many problems are never going to be solved by one person. They're kind of these really broad things that need a lot of work by a lot of people together. And I kind of think my best role is to be a bridge between a lot of that. And so for me, law is kind of the last pillar of that kind of requirement. And yeah, I hope to work in public interest. So hopefully work in the government someday and kind of figure out how to protect people from potential misuses. But yeah, I think a lot of this really touches on entrepreneurship and innovation and things that I've been kind of working on the periphery of. And so I've definitely seen business through every single thread of that work.
Thank you so much. This next question is going to be helpful for most of the people here. As a high schooler, what experiences are best to draw from when interviewing?
Yeah, so I think, again, this kind of goes to what kinds of things you've been up to and what you're excited about. Sometimes, I think in high school especially, it might be hard to access a lot of opportunities that are different from things your classmates might be doing. So if you're in the same extracurriculars or taking the same classes, sometimes if you're answering just from those answers alone or those experiences alone, it's not necessarily going to be unique. I don't think that's actually really a big problem though, because if you can think about what you have gained from those experiences and what you're kind of nerdy or passionate about within that, I think that's a perfectly fine place to start. And I know it might kind of feel like really high pressure to have a whole like big resume of all your leadership positions or like honors credentials or special things that you've done. But genuinely, I don't think those are always going to be like the deciding factors when you're looking at jobs or college interviews or anything that's coming up. Really, it's just, can you actually articulate what you care about in a way that's compelling? And that means you don't necessarily have to talk about these sorts of credentials. I think that there's a lot of pressure to gain from school. And I know I definitely felt that when I was going through college apps, just like this idea of how do I make myself special when everybody around me is doing the same stuff. But yeah, ideally, if you are reading or really interested in other things that you're pursuing on your own, or you're doing things that are kind of outside of school, I think those are important to talk about. And a lot of what makes us ourselves is not just what we do in school, but who we are when we're outside of that. And so sometimes our families leave a big impact on how we think or how we kind of care about things, or our friends or other things. And so it's okay to draw on your personal experiences to the extent that you're comfortable bringing that up. Obviously, there's no pressure to do that. But if you can kind of figure out what forces kind of shape the things you care about, I think you kind of want to start there. Don't really start from the place of how do I impress somebody or what best resume items do I want to highlight, unless you think they also demonstrate this other side of what you're passionate about and who you are.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I was curious because you said that you've done interviews yourself where you've interviewed undergraduates. So I was kind of curious from that other perspective. Do you feel that there's, I guess, like a common mistake people might make, or just common things that you see that you'd hope for people to improve on?
I think the maybe the common, and I wouldn't really call this a mistake either, because I know like on the other side of the interview, I'm also trying to be human and empathetic and understanding where people come from. And it's so normal to feel really nervous when you're going into an interview. So I think it is okay to be human and to have that. But I think something that sometimes makes interviews a little challenging is when people do freeze up or they get really shy, but the way that they exercise that is to kind of not acknowledge it. It's one thing to kind of let yourself feel that, but to kind of, not make so much eye contact or to answer in like really short answers, in really terse, like 1 or 2 word sort of responses. Sometimes this happens when I'm interviewing for like applicants, and it kind of makes it a little bit challenging to figure out where to go from there. But I know one of my goals is always to make people comfortable when I'm interviewing them. And so, yeah, I think usually if somebody is nervous and they call it out and they tell me like, oh, like I'm feeling so nervous, it really helps me like level with them and share like that they should be comfortable. And I'm just trying to get to know them and set expectations really clearly from the beginning. But I think if people don't give me a window to kind of do that, it's really hard, because you don't want to assume as an interviewer that somebody is feeling a certain way unless they share that with you. And so, yeah, I think when you are feeling anxiety or you feel like you just need time to think about something or you just feel uncomfortable, the more you can recognize that in yourself and just even like joke about it in like a really kind of light way in the beginning, it just makes it so much easier to open up after. But if you don't let yourself open up, I think naturally, like, you get to preserve your barriers, which is great for your own protection, but it does make it hard to kind of get through the interview.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we know that there are different types of interviews, like group interviews and individual interviews. How do you handle group interviews differently than individual interviews?
Yeah, I think this is such a great question. And I remember I've done group interviews before for some summer programs I was doing. And I think there's this kind of tension there where at once you want to feel really competitive and you want to make sure that you stand out from everyone else in that group. And when you are kind of in that mindset, you sort of block out everything that's happening unless somebody asks you a question, and you're just thinking about your own answer and how you want to figure out like how to respond to a question. But the other side of that is that I think group interviews are also a place where you can show that you can be a team player and that you aren't just thinking about yourself all the time. And it's really hard to get out of this single track, like focusing on yourself mindset. So what I would recommend is really just try and pay attention to what everyone else is saying. And the more you can kind of reflect on their answers, the better. Not only because it kind of lets you build on what they're saying, but it helps the whole kind of interview environment feel more supportive and collaborative. And I know that feels really counterintuitive because it might be inherently competitive. But if somebody makes a really great point, instead of kind of feeling like you need to ignore it, you can always just say like, wow, like that was a really great point, and here's what I think about it on top of that. So the more you can kind of build on things, the more you can benefit from other people's answers, but also you're not kind of framing yourself as someone who is isolating yourself from that environment, but you're really kind of cooperating and collaborating. And I think that also at once like makes you a better person to work with, or maybe a better person to choose for whatever you're interviewing for, but also just makes that environment so much better and healthier.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I think we'll go ahead and close our breakout rooms now. So we'll bring everyone back into this main room. So we'll
I'm
take,
so sorry. I got a question in the chat. Is it okay if we just answer one more question?
or we'll actually be regrouping and then
Oh, at
asking
the end?
questions with Jiya back. So
Okay, thank you so much.
okay, perfect. Okay. All right. I think everyone's back now. All right, perfect. So Anna, if you want to go ahead and ask that question.
Okay, so Mia asked in the chat, how would you describe the interview process in computer science in comparison to other interviews? How can students prepare for those interviews? And what are key words or topics that recruiters look for or will be wowed by? Or what should interviewees like kind of avoid saying or doing during interviews?
Yeah, I can answer this one really quickly, just trying to make sure I'm not like excluding anyone who isn't interested in comp sci. But I think computer science interviews are really weird in that you usually are sharing screen and actually like doing work and someone watches you. And sometimes it's really stilted. So if I was doing work at like Microsoft before, the actual work is like, if you don't know something, you just Google it and that's fine. But in an interview, that might be really weird to do. And so there's this weird sort of surveillance aspect of that. Whereas when I was interviewing at certain companies, they tell you to just act normal like you would at work, and they let you Google and do whatever you need to do. And so different kind of companies set up things in different ways. You just kind of want to figure out what kind of interview this one's going to be. So ideally, like ask around and see if anyone who works there or anyone who has interviewed there knows what that setup is like. So that's kind of one awkward reality of it all. And for prepping, there are so many websites online that have practice problems or things you can try out. And for behavioral interviews, they're pretty standard and pretty much the same as any other field, really just trying to get to know you and what kinds of things you're into. And last thing on how to be like interesting to recruiters or like having keywords. I think buzzwords are just dangerous territory in general if you don't have a lot to add to like saying something about, for example, machine learning, which is a big buzzword right now. I would try to steer clear of that, but just, yeah, I think what's most important is you can show what kinds of projects you've worked on or things that you've done that make you special and show that you've actually done the work. So I think buzzwords are kind of the opposite of that. They might be kind of empty or hollow unless you have done work in that space.
Gotcha. Thank you for sharing that. And sorry, Jiya, I never officially welcomed you back into the main room. But we have been asking a few questions around. So from here on out, feel free, either one of you guys to, answer first and then bounce off of each other. But our next question is, how do you dress for interviews?
I could take this one real quick. So for a majority of the business interviews, you're going to see a more of like a professional, like you want to wear your, suit. For ladies, it's like closed toe heels. There's like a business professional specific attire that you want to make sure that you're, presenting yourself in. However, at the same time, if we're looking at companies, I know the general advice is like, look at the company's environment. If they're more of like casually presenting yourself, obviously still like look put together, put effort in how you're presenting yourself, but maybe you don't have to wear a suit and tie. Maybe you could wear something more casual, maybe pants and just a nice blouse or something for ladies, or something different for men. But understanding the company or organization culture that you're going into, it's general advice catering your attire to that. For college, I know a majority of you guys are applying or interviewing for colleges. You don't need to put yourself in a suit and tie unless they mention, it's a professional attire. For the most part, as long as you're looking presentable, in a nice shirt, blouse, something that's not like overly casual, you should be good to go.
Thank you so much. And our next question is, what is the process of interviewing fresh out of college?
That's fully for you.
Okay. Just to clarify, does this mean like just getting your first job out of college?
Yeah, that could be included too.
Okay. Yeah, I think this really kind of anchors on everything else I think we've talked about, which is really like depends on the field. But at this point, you have had a few more years to talk about and figure out exactly more of who you are and what kinds of things you're interested in. Hopefully college has given you space to try out more extracurriculars that are more you, or work on projects with other classmates that are more up your alley. And so hopefully at this point, you've done a lot more things that you can speak to that you're proud of and excited about. Whereas I think in high school, that's just a little harder to come by sometimes. And so at this point, maybe you'll just have a lot more to talk about.
Awesome, thank you. And for both of you guys, do you have any tips on overcoming interview anxiety or ways that we can kind of practice better to negate that anxiety?
I could start off for that real quick. In general, I think I've come to realize that interviewing is just, it's not as stressful as like we make it more stressful than it needs to be. To be honest, both parties want each other. They're just at this point coming to a platform and figuring out whether they personally are going to able to help each other grow professionally. Like, are you going to be able to help your organization grow? And is the organization going to help you grow with the goals that you kind of intent, like that you portrayed throughout the interview process, right? So present yourself in a candid way. Obviously be like professional, don't use like weird words or something. You don't want to show yourself in that light. But as long as you're putting yourself in the professional light that you want to be placed in and showing just like a genuine connection to your goals, to your personal ambitions, that will naturally stand out. So don't try going over the top and trying to present yourself in a way you're not, because in the moments where you're stressed, if that's a technical interview and they ask you something that you're stressed, like that you may not know how to answer, your natural self will come in. And if that natural self is too, far distant from the one that you have been portraying for the previous 20 minutes of the interview, they're going to know and they're going to be able to catch on to that. So don't try and change your the way you present yourself. And for that reason, it's not important to be nervous at all. Listen to good music before and just get into that interview. And once you're done, forget about it, move on. It's all okay.
I'm going to add on to kind of like repeat everything that Jiya said, which is totally accurate. And I know for me, like at this point, I have done so many interviews for so many things and I get nervous before every single one. So I know like for me, it never goes away. But what I try to do is focus on why I'm like actually so excited about the thing I'm about to interview for. and not worry about the person on the other end of that call, but just the thing that I want to do. And the more I can think about that kind of bigger picture, the easier it is to kind of forget all these small things. Hopefully in the call, you can lose yourself to like how excited you are about this other thing. And so it's not about that kind of other person who, you might feel like is judging you or kind of looking at everything you do. It's not about that. It's about this other thing.
Thank you so much. And another question is, how did you know you wanted to pursue this career path? Because I know, including me, a lot of people are like confused and can't really pinpoint what they want to dedicate their like life to doing.
You should take this one first.
Okay. For me, this was kind of a big question that I ended my senior year of high school with. I didn't know what I wanted to do necessarily because I spent a lot of my time thinking that I'm going to go into medicine. I applied to a bunch of medical programs. And then kind of in the final few months of senior year, did I switch into business and then decide that, okay, I'm going to study business like as a full-time career. And now I'm going into investment banking, which is as business as I can think of. But the reason I realized that I don't want to do healthcare was because I just thought that change that I was trying to make, or like the goals that I had regarding the healthcare industry, as a doctor or as a direct medical professional, I wouldn't be able to do that. And so I was hoping to like make some sort of infrastructural change to the healthcare industry, because those were things that stood out to me. I've seen my parents struggle with it. I've seen my peers kind of talk about this on a day-to-day basis. So understanding that the change that I want to make on just a general level, I was able to cancel out some of the career options. And I was like, okay, this is not what I want to do. And then leave it to the rest of time to help you dictate where you want to go, because this is obviously very early on to finalize any career path. So just as you build these experiences throughout, the high school or even going into college, just keep in mind the things you like and don't like, so that at the end of the day, when you're choosing new opportunities, you're able to align with your interests and kind of use that to pave your path in whatever you want to pursue. But yeah.
Also, that nothing is permanent. And like, if you feel like you made a choice that you don't love, you can always change your mind as long as you're kind of maintaining an honest dialogue with yourself. So you're not stuck in something if you make a choice. It's always okay to explore, and like maybe sometimes that's the only way to learn whether you actually like something or not. So it's okay if it doesn't work out the first time. It's totally normal.
Thank you both for sharing that with us. I know as high schoolers, we do have a lot of anxiety sometimes trying to figure out what we're supposed to do with our lives. So that's definitely helpful for us moving forward. And I think we might actually have time for one more question. So this is a question that I personally am curious about too, but I know that a lot of interviews have like situational questions that kind of ask you like, what would you do if this happened? But do you guys have any tips specifically for those types of questions and how to answer them?
I can start. I think something that is important to do in these sorts of questions that are really open-ended is to figure out what assumptions you're working with. And so if you feel like you don't understand something about this situation they gave you, like it's okay to ask more questions, like, and clarify about like the group dynamic or the team in that situation that's involved, and about your role in that situation. And it's okay to say what your assumptions are. So maybe like if someone was asking me how I'd handle some sort of conflict, I'd lay out like what my assumptions are of like, oh, I think this is my role in this team. Like, I think this is how this team has handled these problems before, and this is why that's good or bad. Like you should just talk through why you're thinking the way you are. And so there's a little more context to your answer instead of it just seeming arbitrary or the interviewer not really understanding where you're coming from. But the more you can break down those assumptions, I think the better it serves you.
And just kind of like echoing that completely, I think that was very well said. Also, this might be a time to highlight a group, like considering that this is like a group situation that maybe they presented you with, how you deal with a conflict or something. Highlighting maybe a few relevant experiences related to that and how you may have dealt with that, somewhere in your resume that maybe you wanted to highlight but weren't able to convey in other parts of your interview. It's also a good time to connect certain details, not giving full emphasis to those experiences, but just hinting that, okay, this is also something that I've worked on, and making sure that you're maximizing your interview time and your ability to convey your experiences. This would be a good question, to have.
All right, thank you both so much. We've truly enjoyed hearing all of your different experiences and advice, especially about interviewing and even just about your journey getting to where you are today. But unfortunately, we are kind of nearing the end of our event time. So before we wrap up, I'd like us all to take a quick Zoom group picture that will be posted on our Instagram and our socials. So for all of our attendees, if you guys could turn on your cameras if you feel comfortable, give everyone a few seconds, and that way we kind of know who was here and who got to listen and really engage with today's session. All right, so Rachel, when you're ready, I'll count down from 3. Okay. All right, 3, 2, 1. All right, awesome. Are we good, Rachel?
Let's take one more on the phone.
Okay, gotcha. All right, one more time, guys. 3, 2, 1. All right, perfect. Thank you so much. So Girls for Business will be posting event recaps on our Instagram, LinkedIn, and we'll also be releasing an article on this event shortly. So make sure you stay tuned for all of our social media info at the end of the event during our wrap up.
And
right.
moving on to the next slide, we have our panelists' contact information. If any of you would like to reach out later or have any more questions that we couldn't get to today, you can reach out via email or connect with them on LinkedIn, and feel free to take a picture of the slide or screenshot it. Okay, so now we'll be dropping a link to our event feedback form in the chat. The form just takes like a couple minutes, and we'd really appreciate any feedback you have from today to make future GFB events better. So we'll put it in the chat. Oh yeah, thank you.
All right, awesome. And now just to wrap up with a little Girls for Business plug, be sure to follow us on all our socials to stay updated with our GFB content. For more on the latest business news and helpful business tips, you can check out Girls for Business on Instagram, LinkedIn, and our website, girlsforbusiness.org. As I mentioned earlier, event recaps will be posted. And for everyone currently attending, if you'd like to be tagged in the Instagram post, feel free to leave your Instagram handle in the chat right now. You guys can also connect with others from this call. So I'll give everyone a second to drop their tags in the chat. And then we also know that this is a lot of information. So if you guys would like to take a picture to save it for later, that would be awesome. All right, perfect. And then moving forward, if you guys would like to get involved with the GFB community, we have tons of ways that you can. So to access all of these links, you can just take a picture of the slide or scan the QR code right there. And we really do have a lot of ways that you can get involved with our organization, depending on how much time you have and how much you can commit to. So you can apply to become a mentee and receive one-on-one mentorship from a business college student or business professional. You can also subscribe to our mailing list to receive newsletters and get more information on the latest news in business, career tips, and business opportunities. And additionally, you can join our team at Girls for Business. We're currently accepting applications for many different team roles and would love to work with you guys in the future. The application links are all listed on the screen. And lastly, you can join our community Slack to network with other girls with similar interests and just to build connections from all over the world. So the invitation to join is in the bottom left-hand corner of this slide. All right. And then moving on to our last slide. That does bring us to the end of our Elevate Your Interview event. Thank you so much, Jiya and Kiran, for teaching us more about the interview process and ways you can prepare for future interviews. We truly learned so much from you both. We'll definitely be using your tips to hopefully score us some internships and jobs in the future. But thank you for taking the time to speak today. And additionally, a huge thank you to all of our participants for taking the time to attend this event as well. So if you have any additional questions or suggestions for GFB, please feel free to stay behind for a few minutes and we'd love to chat with you. Or you can please hopefully fill out that event feedback form, and we'll also be looking at those responses to see how we can better our events in the future. But for everyone else, I hope you guys had an amazing time today, and hopefully we'll see you at future GFB events. Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Jiya.
you, Jiya.
Thank you.